The eternal crown floated like a dead giant in the endless sea of stars. Once it was the pride of the alien empire, the personal starship of the emperor himself, a symbol of unbroken power. But now, it was silent. Its engines had gone cold. Its lights had faded to shadows, and the galaxy whispered that even gods had abandoned it. Fleets circled the broken vessel like vultures, but none dared to touch it. To damage the ship was to insult the emperor. To fail repairing it was worse. It meant death. For months, alien engineers had tried. They brought the brightest minds, the most advanced tools, even sacred rituals from their priests. All failed. Each one entered with pride but left in chains, disgraced, punished, or worse. The emperor's throne room had grown cold, his silence more terrifying than his anger. Whispers spread across the stars. If the eternal crown could not be saved, perhaps the empire itself would crumble. Then, in the midst of fear and failure, a strange figure stepped forward. A human. He was no prince, no great warrior, not even a trained alien engineer. He was only a mechanic dressed in simple work clothes, carrying a small bag of tools that looked laughable compared to the Empire's machines. The court stared in disbelief. Some sneered, others laughed outright. A fragile creature from a death world? A human who lived on a tiny blue planet at the edge of space? And he dared to say he could fix the royal starship? Guards moved to silence him, but the Emperor raised a single hand. His voice, deep as thunder, broke the hall. Let him try. The words fell like a storm. The nobles gasped, the engineers protested, the priests shook their heads in fury. Impossible, they cried. Blasphemy, others hissed. But the Emperor did not explain himself. His eyes, sharp as a blade, remained fixed on the human. Something in the Emperor's gaze made the hall fall silent. And so, under the watch of thousands, the human was led to the eternal crown. The starship loomed before him, massive and ancient, larger than entire cities back on Earth. Its surface was scarred from battles, its hull etched with golden marks of power. To the aliens, this ship was a living god, and to touch it was like touching fire. The human, however, did not bow. He placed his hand on the cold steel and whispered something under his breath, words no alien could understand. The guards waited, expecting him to hesitate, expecting fear to show in his eyes. But he walked forward, steady and calm, like a man who had seen broken machines all his life and knew they could always be fixed. Inside, the corridors stretched endlessly, filled with shadows and silence. Strange alien runes glowed faintly on the walls like fading stars. The smell of burnt circuits lingered in the air. This was no ordinary machine. It was alive with history, mystery, and power. Any alien who had entered before had failed to understand it. But the human did not see a holy relic. He saw a machine, a broken one, and machines could be repaired. He knelt beside a shattered panel, pulled out his tools, and began to work. His fingers moved quickly, carefully, with a kind of confidence that seemed almost unnatural. Sparks flew. The sound of metal on metal echoed in the silent ship. Outside, through massive screens, the Emperor and his court watched every move. Some whispered that the human was foolish, that he would fail as all others had failed. Others remained quiet, watching with a strange unease. There was something unsettling about the way he worked, as though the ship itself responded to him. Hours passed. The human moved from one section to another, crawling through vents, climbing towers of circuits, adjusting wires with his simple tools. He spoke softly to himself, muttering words of logic and repair. Every now and then, a faint light flickered on. Every time, the watching aliens stiffened in shock. How is this possible? One noble whispered. He should not even understand the language of the ship, an engineer hissed. But the Emperor remained silent. His eyes narrowed, studying not just the human's work, but the strange energy that seemed to grow inside the eternal crown with each passing moment. The silence of the ship was no longer complete. It had begun to hum again, soft, low, like the heartbeat of a giant slowly waking. The court grew restless, fear mixing with awe. Could this fragile human truly do what the brightest of their empire could not? The human wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes never leaving the glowing circuits. He was not afraid of failure. He was not afraid of death. For him, fixing what was broken was not a burden. It was his nature. Machines spoke to him in ways others could not hear. And the eternal crown, the pride of an empire, was beginning to answer. In the Emperor's hall, no one dared to breathe. The story was only beginning, but already the galaxy had changed. For the first time, aliens saw not a weak creature, not a simple human, but something far more dangerous. A being who looked at the impossible and saw only a problem waiting to be solved. And as the ship's faint hum grew louder, a shiver ran through the Empire. The silent crown was no longer silent. It had begun to wake, and the human was the reason why. The great doors of the eternal crown opened with a low growl, their ancient metal grinding as if the ship itself disliked being disturbed. The human stepped forward, his boots echoing against the vast steel floor. Behind him, alien guards stood stiff, their weapons ready, not to protect him, but to end him if he made one wrong move. To them, he was nothing more than an intruder walking on sacred ground. The corridors stretched endlessly. Before him, towering walls glowed faintly with dying lights, strange alien runes pulsing like the last embers of a dying fire. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of burnt circuits and dust from centuries of history. It was like stepping into the belly of a slumbering beast. To the alien engineers, this place was a temple. To the priests, it was holy. But to the human, it was only a machine. Broken, yes, but still a machine. He paused at the first control panel, brushing his hand across its cracked surface. Sparks spat weakly, like a dying candle. The aliens watching through the view screens leaned forward, expecting him to flinch, to stumble, to reveal his ignorance. Instead, the human crouched, pulled a tool from his small satchel, and began working with quiet focus. His hands moved confidently, like a man who had done this 1,000 times before, not with alien ships, but with machines that carried the same heart, power, wires, and flow. The Emperor watched in silence from his throne chamber, his eyes locked on the small figure. Around him, nobles muttered. "He knows nothing." One sneered. "He will break it further." Another hissed. "This is madness. A human cannot touch what our greatest failed to repair." But still, the Emperor gave no answer. His gaze remained fixed, his expression unreadable. Inside the ship, the human pulled away a panel to reveal tangled wires glowing faintly with unstable energy. He tilted his head, studying it, then gave a soft chuckle. To the aliens outside, it was unnerving, like he was laughing at a secret only he understood. He pulled out 2 clamps, made quick adjustments, and suddenly the corridor lights blinked. A single hum rose from the walls, faint but clear. The guards flinched. The nobles gasped. Even the engineers who had studied the ship for years leaned closer, eyes wide. Something had changed. Something had answered him. The human didn't look up. He continued deeper into the ship, moving as though guided by instinct. He walked past rooms filled with dark consoles, past halls lined with alien statues, past reactor doors carved with symbols that told stories of ancient victories. He touched nothing unnecessary, but when he did stop, his hands were precise, sure, and unshaken. Hours passed, and still he worked. He crawled through vents, climbed access ladders that seemed endless, and squeezed into narrow spaces meant for machines, not men. Sweat covered his brow, his breathing heavy, but he never slowed. Each time he emerged, another part of the ship flickered alive. A corridor light here, a console there, faint beeps echoing like a heartbeat returning. The watching court grew restless. The whispers turned sharper. "This cannot be chance," someone muttered. "How does he know where to go?" Another voice, filled with unease, whispered. "Perhaps the ship listens to him." The idea sent a chill through the chamber. For centuries, the Eternal Crown had ignored their efforts, refusing every hand that touched it. But now, before their eyes, it seemed to bend beneath the touch of a human. Inside, the human reached the central chamber. It was vast, filled with towering reactors and glowing conduits that pulsed faintly with dying light. The walls were lined with alien glyphs that told the Empire's greatest legends, their victories, their rise to power. To any alien, this place was holy. To the human, it was only the heart of a machine waiting to breathe again. He set his bag down and pulled out tool after tool, each one simple compared to the Empire's advanced instruments. Wires sparked, smoke hissed, but his hands never shook. Slowly, the reactors responded. Their pulse grew stronger, their lights brighter, as though they were waking from centuries of slumber. The Emperor leaned forward, his silence heavier than words. Around him, the court could no longer laugh. Their pride twisted into fear. This was no accident. The human was doing the impossible. Back inside the ship, the mechanic sat cross-legged on the cold floor, wiping his face with his sleeve. He stared at the main console, where faint symbols glowed. He studied them, then traced his finger over the lines, his eyes sharp with thought. He muttered to himself, his voice low but steady. Then, with a sudden decision, he pressed a sequence of commands. The ship shuddered. The floor trembled. Lights flared across the chamber, flooding it with brilliance. The guards outside jumped, aiming their weapons as alarms blared. But inside, the human smiled faintly. The Eternal Crown had answered. For the first time in years, the Royal Starship had come alive, even if only a little. Its hum grew steady, like a beast stretching its limbs after endless sleep. The court erupted into chaos. "Impossible," shouted nobles. "He has done what none could," hissed the engineers. The priests fell silent, their chants dying in their throats. And still, the Emperor said nothing. Only his eyes revealed his thoughts, sharp, curious, and dangerous. He had seen many things in his reign, but never this. A human, fixing what the galaxy itself had declared untouchable. The human leaned back, exhausted but calm, wiping soot from his hands. He looked at the glowing console, then whispered with quiet certainty, "You're not dead yet." The words were simple, but to the aliens watching, they carried a weight they could not explain. For in that moment they realized the truth. The silent crown was no longer silent, and the one who had awakened it was not an alien lord or a priest, but a human, and from that moment, the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The Eternal Crown was no longer silent. Its walls trembled with faint power, its lights blinked weakly like tired eyes opening after a long sleep. The human stood, at the center of it all, his simple tools scattered around him, his face covered in sweat and soot. He looked small compared to the towering reactors and endless corridors, but in that moment, he seemed larger than any noble in the Emperor's court. Outside, the galaxy's most powerful leaders watched in silence. The Emperor remained still, his dark eyes following every movement. Around him, nobles whispered furiously, engineers clenched their fists, and priests muttered broken prayers. To them, this was not just repair. It was defiance of everything they believed. The Starship was sacred, untouchable, yet it had responded to a human. The human rose to his feet, his gaze fixed on the glowing symbols that flickered across the main console. They were alien, complex, a language that had taken scholars lifetimes to understand. But he didn't hesitate. He traced the patterns with his calloused fingers, tilting his head as though listening to the hum of the machine itself. Then, with a calm breath, he adjusted a sequence of circuits and pressed his hand against the control. A surge of power exploded through the ship. Lights blazed, alarms roared, and the walls vibrated with energy so strong it rattled the fleets outside. For a moment, the nobles screamed that he had doomed them all. Guards raised their weapons, prepared to cut the human down before the Emperor gave the order. But then, the chaos stilled. The ship calmed. Its engines glowed faintly, steady, Alive. Systems that had been dark for decades now pulsed like veins filling with blood. It was not perfect, not complete, but the impossible had begun. The eternal crown had awakened. The Emperor leaned forward. His voice, deep as the void, broke the silence. "Continue." The guards hesitated. The nobles shouted in protest. "Enough! He risks everything. He insults the crown." But the Emperor's command was final, unshakable. The human was allowed to work, and so he did. He crawled deeper into the ship, moving through twisting tunnels of steel and shadow. His hands found broken conduits. His ears caught the faint rhythm of failing reactors. Where others saw divine mystery, he saw design. Where others feared curses, he saw problems waiting for answers. He whispered to himself as he worked, speaking in a language only machines seemed to understand. Each spark of his tools sent a ripple through the vessel. First, the communication relays lit up, sending faint signals across the fleet. Then long-dead doors slid open with thunderous groans. Entire sections of the ship, locked for centuries, came alive at his touch. The aliens outside stared in disbelief. Their finest had failed here. They had used machines more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. And yet those machines had been powerless. But this human, with nothing more than a satchel of tools and stubborn hands, was bending the impossible. One alien engineer, his pride broken, whispered bitterly, "He doesn't understand the crown. He cannot. He is only guessing." But another voice, trembling with fear, answered, "Then why does the ship obey him?" Those words spread like fire through the court. The nobles, once laughing at the human, now fell into uneasy silence. Priests clutched their robes, staring at the view screens as if watching blasphemy unfold before their eyes. For centuries, the eternal crown had ignored them, punished their arrogance with silence. Yet now, in the hands of a human, it was breathing again. The human climbed out of a maintenance shaft, his face lit by the glow of the ship's core. He stood before the central reactor, its massive coils humming weakly, like the heart of a dying god. He laid a hand against it, closing his eyes. To the aliens, it looked as if he prayed, but in truth he was listening to the rhythm, the imbalance, the cry of a machine desperate to live. With steady movements, he began to repair. He connected broken wires, adjusted ancient circuits, and used techniques no alien had thought of. He was not bound by their sacred rules, their fear of failure, their worship of technology. To him, the reactor was not holy. It was a challenge. And humans, above all, loved challenges. Then, with a final twist of his tool, the core roared. The entire ship shook as the eternal crown awoke fully. Its lights blazed like suns. Its engines thundered with life, and its voice, a deep, vibrating echoed across space. The fleets trembled. Alarms wailed. For the first time in centuries, the royal flagship was alive. The human staggered back, breathing hard, but his lips curved into a faint smile. He had done it. The impossible was no longer impossible. The Emperor rose slowly from his throne, his long robes flowing behind him. His court fell silent, their voices caught in their throats. All eyes turned to him, waiting for judgment. Would he punish the human for daring to touch his holy ship? Or would he acknowledge what no one could deny? The Emperor's gaze burned as he stared at the view screens. The human stood in the glowing chamber surrounded by the living power of the ship. For the first time in many years, the Emperor's lips curved, not in anger, but in something darker, sharper. A smile. The galaxy did not know it yet, but at that moment history shifted. A human had not only repaired the Emperor's ship, he had shaken the pride of an entire empire. And the Emperor, watching in silence, was already thinking of how this human would change everything. The roar of the eternal crown spread across, the stars like thunder breaking through silence. Fleets orbiting nearby fell into chaos as sensors screamed with readings they had never seen before. For decades, the royal starship had been nothing more than a cold relic, a monument of past glory. Now it was alive. Its engines pulsed with raw power, Its shield shimmered faintly, and its voice carried like the echo of a giant breathing after a long sleep. The human stood in the central chamber, bathed in the golden light of the reactor. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, his face marked with grease and sweat. But in his eyes there was no fear, only quiet satisfaction. He had not come to worship this ship, nor to fear it. He had come to fix it, and fix it he had. Outside, the Emperor's court erupted. Nobles shouted, priests cried blasphemy, and engineers fell to their knees in disbelief. Some demanded the human be executed at once, claiming he had corrupted the sacred vessel. Others whispered that perhaps he had been chosen by fate itself. But above the noise, the Emperor's voice cut through like a blade. Silence. The chamber froze. All eyes turned toward the Emperor. He did not look at his court. He did not even glance at his nobles or his priests. His gaze remained fixed on the glowing image of the human standing inside the eternal crown. "Bring him to me," the Emperor commanded. But before the guards could move, something extraordinary happened. The ship itself responded. The walls shook. The floor trembled, and across the galaxy signals were sent out. Ancient codes no one had seen in centuries. The eternal crown did not just awaken. It declared itself alive. Systems that had been thought lost forever came back online. Weapons locked into position, communication towers extended like spears, and deep within the ship, ancient forges sparked to life, whispering of power that could build worlds or destroy them. The guards stumbled back in fear. Even the priests fell silent, their chants choking in their throats. The ship, the holy relic of the Empire, was not just functioning, it was obeying. And it obeyed the human. The mechanic looked up as consoles lit around him, one after another, responding to his presence. He touched a control panel, and the ship's engines flared brighter. He adjusted a circuit, and the shield shimmered like an endless ocean. It was as if the eternal crown had waited all this time, not for alien hands, but for his. Whispers spread through the court. "This cannot be. The crown knows him. No, the crown has chosen him." The Emperor stood slowly, his presence filling the throne room like a storm. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of stars. "For years, my empire has failed this ship. My brightest minds, my holiest priests, my proudest engineers. None could touch it without disgrace. And yet this human, this death worlder, has awakened it as though it were nothing." He raised a hand, silencing protests. His eyes burned with something more than curiosity now. They burned with possibility. Perhaps the galaxy has forgotten what humans are. Perhaps it is time they are reminded. Inside the ship, the human wiped his hands on his work clothes, breathing hard. He knew he had done something no one else could, but he did not yet understand the weight of it. He was only a mechanic. To him, this was just a repair, a machine speaking to him in ways others could not hear, but to the Empire, it was revelation. Then, with a deep rumbling sound, the eternal crown completed its awakening. The ship's engines roared to full strength, flooding the fleet with waves of power. Lights illuminated every corridor. Systems aligned perfectly, and a sound filled the chamber, a low, resonating tone that shook every soul who heard it. The human looked around, stunned. The ship wasn't just alive. It was aware. The Emperor's court collapsed to their knees, overcome with awe and terror. Never before had they felt the ship's voice so clearly. It was like standing before a god. Yet in the center of it all stood a lone human, unbowed, unafraid, his hands still dirty with the work of repair. The Emperor stepped forward from his throne. His cloak dragged across the floor, his eyes locked on the view screen showing the human. For the first time in centuries, he lowered his head just slightly in acknowledgement. The court gasped. The Emperor, bowing his head, even in the smallest gesture, was something no one had ever seen. The message was clear. This human was no longer a mechanic. He was something greater. The fleets outside steadied as the eternal crown rose, its engines blazing with light brighter than suns. Across the Empire, signals spread, carrying the news that the royal starship had awakened. Billions of aliens looked up at their skies, their hearts trembling. The symbol of their empire had returned, but in the shadows of their wonder, fear also grew. For it was not their emperor who had awakened the crown. It was not their priests nor their engineers. It was a human, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The eternal crown glowed like a newborn star, its engines thundering with renewed life. The once silent halls now pulsed with light, and across the galaxy, signals spread like wildfire, messages that the Emperor's ship, the heart of the Empire, had awakened. Entire fleets saluted, priests wept in awe, and nobles trembled as centuries of shame were erased in a single day. But within the Emperor's grand throne hall, silence ruled. No one dared to speak. All eyes were fixed on the human standing inside the ship, his face tired yet calm, his hands blackened by soot. He looked so small against the towering screens, yet every noble felt the weight of his presence. The court was torn. Some whispered that he was blessed by fate. Others hissed that he was a danger, a heretic who had touched the sacred vessel with filthy hands. The engineers sat in quiet defeat, their pride shattered, their years of study reduced to nothing by a man with nothing more than stubborn will and simple tools. Finally, one noble dared to speak. His voice shook, but his anger burned. "My emperor, this is a trick. This creature insults you. End him now before the crown falls into corruption." Others quickly followed, their voices rising like a storm. "He is a threat. He cannot be trusted. He is only human." The priests fell to their knees, shouting prayers, demanding punishment. They declared that no outsider could be allowed to control what was holy. The noise grew louder, sharper, filling the chamber with chaos. But then the Emperor stood. The sound died instantly. His figure rose above them, tall and imposing, his cloak flowing like the shadow of a mountain. His face was carved from stone, his eyes burning like twin suns. He raised his hand, and the hall obeyed. Silence crushed the chamber. His voice followed, deep and heavy, each word striking like a hammer. "Enough." He let the word echo before he continued. "You say he insults me. You say he defiles the crown. Yet I ask you, where were your skills when I commanded the crown to rise? Where were your prayers when its light had faded? Where was your pride when my ship lay in silence, mocking this empire?" The nobles lowered their eyes. None dared to answer. The Emperor's gaze moved across them, sharp and merciless. Then he turned back to the screen where the human stood inside the awakened ship. "And yet," he said slowly, "this human, this so-called fragile creature, has done what you could not. He has awakened my crown." A shiver ran through the chamber. The Emperor's words were not praise, they were judgment. He continued, his voice iron and fire. "Shall I kill him? Then I kill the one who gave me back my empire's pride. Shall I cast him aside? Then I cast aside the proof that greatness comes not from blood, nor from worship, but from will." The human stood silent, unaware of the storm his actions had caused. To him, this was only repair, only the work of fixing what was broken. But to the Empire, it was something greater. It was a challenge to everything they believed. The Emperor stepped down from his throne, each step echoing across the silent hall. His robes swept across the floor as he approached the central dais. He lifted his hand, pointing toward the human on the glowing screen. "This one is not to be punished. This one is not to be cast aside. This one is to be honored." Gasps filled the hall. Some cried out in disbelief, others in rage. Nobles clutched their robes, priests wailed, and generals stared in stunned silence. Never in the Empire's history had such words been spoken. The Emperor raised his voice, drowning them. "All, hear me. From this day the one who repaired my crown shall stand under my protection. He shall not be a slave nor a servant, but a guest of the throne. His life is tied to mine, and his name shall be remembered in the records of this empire, the Yo. Chamber erupted again, but this time in fear. For the Emperor had not just spared the human, he had raised him higher than any noble could dream. He had broken tradition, shattered pride, and given respect to an outsider. One general, bold and furious, stepped forward. "My Emperor, this is madness. To honor a human above your own people." The Emperor turned his gaze on him, and the general froze. The weight of those eyes was like a blade pressed to his throat. The Emperor's voice, quiet but lethal, silenced him. Madness? No. This is clarity. You mistake pride for strength. You mistake tradition for power. But power is earned. And this human has earned it. The hall trembled under his words. None dared to argue further. Inside the eternal crown, the human looked up at the glowing reactor, unaware of the storm of politics and fury outside. He only knew the ship was alive again, and that for him that was enough. But in the Emperor's heart, a decision had been made. The human was more than a mechanic now. He was a symbol, a weapon, a reminder that humanity was not weak, not fragile, not forgotten, and the Emperor, for all his power, for all his pride, could not ignore what he had seen. He would protect the human, he would honor him, and through that decision, the galaxy itself would begin to change. The galaxy was holding its breath. News of the Eternal Crown's awakening had already spread like fire through the stars. Fleets carried the message, priests sang in disbelief, and entire worlds turned their eyes to the Emperor's throne. For centuries, the royal ship had been silent, a reminder of failure. Now it lived again, and the one responsible was not alien, not noble, not priest, but a single human. In the throne hall, the air was heavy with tension. Nobles whispered in fury, priests clung to their faith, generals stood restless, but none dared defy the Emperor's command. His words had already changed everything. The human was to be honored, not punished. Still, many wondered, what kind of honor would it be? Gold? Land? A title? Whatever it was, they believed it could never be greater than their own. They were wrong. The Emperor rose, tall and unshaken, his eyes fixed on the glowing screens where the human still stood within the eternal crown. The man looked small, tired, unaware that the galaxy now revolved around him, yet in that small figure, the Emperor saw more strength than in all his armies combined. "Bring him here," the Emperor commanded. The great hall doors opened. Guards escorted the human forward, their expressions unreadable. He walked with slow, careful steps, his tool bag still slung over his shoulder. He looked nothing like a hero. No shining armor, no royal robes, just a mechanic, stained with soot, his boots worn from labor. But when he entered the throne hall, all fell silent. The nobles who had mocked him now lowered their eyes. The priests who had called him blasphemy dared not meet his gaze. Even the generals, proud and unyielding, stepped back as he passed. At the center of the hall, he stopped. His eyes lifted toward the Emperor, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The court waited, breathless, for judgment. Then the Emperor descended from his throne. Step by step, his cloak trailing like a storm cloud, he approached the human. The nobles trembled. The priest prayed. And then, it happened. The Emperor bowed his head. It was not a deep bow, not one of submission, but even the smallest tilt from the ruler of the galaxy was more than the court had ever witnessed. The hall erupted in gasps, some choking back disbelief, others frozen in terror. The Emperor, who bowed to no one, was showing respect to a human. His voice followed, deep and unyielding. "You have given back my crown. You have reminded this empire what power truly is, and for this you shall not be rewarded with gold, nor land, nor meaningless titles." He extended his arm, his voice carrying across the hall like thunder. "From this day forward, you stand under my protection. You will walk beside me as an honored guest of the throne. No noble shall command you, no priest shall curse you, no blade shall harm you, for your life is tied to mine." The human blinked, stunned, unsure if he had heard correctly. But the court understood. and they were shaken to their core. This was not just protection. This was power beyond anything they could imagine. The Emperor turned, his gaze sweeping across the hall. Let it be known, a human saved the crown, and by my word he shall be remembered in the histories of this empire. His name will echo across the stars. The chamber shook with his words. Some nobles collapsed in despair, their pride crushed. The priests wailed, calling it sacrilege. But no one dared raise their voice in defiance. The Emperor had spoken, and, so it was written, the human mechanic who had entered as nothing more than an outsider left the throne hall as something far greater. He was not a soldier, not a noble, not a priest. He was a symbol, a living proof that humanity was far more than the galaxy had ever believed. Across the stars, the news spread faster than light. Worlds whispered in awe. Empires trembled. Enemies shivered. For if one human could awaken the crown, what else could humanity do? In the shadows, alien rulers held secret councils, debating if humanity was to be feared or destroyed before it rose too far. Merchants spoke of alliances, generals spoke of war, and ordinary citizens looked to the skies with curiosity. Who were these humans, these death-worlders who bent the impossible to their will? Inside the Eternal Crown, the ship itself pulsed with a new kind of energy. It seemed to recognize its human savior, responding to his touch as though bound by destiny. Engineers whispered that the crown would obey only him now. Priests whispered that the ship had chosen its master, but the human himself remained quiet. He did not see himself as chosen, nor as powerful. To him it was simple. The ship was broken, and he had fixed it. That was what he did. That was who he was. Yet the galaxy no longer saw him as just a mechanic. They saw him as a legend, and as the Eternal Crown blazed across the stars once more, carrying both emperor and human within its walls, the universe realized something terrifying and undeniable. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was rising.